Democracy That Delivers is brought to you by the Center for International Private Enterprise. Now to your host.
Hello, everybody. My name is Frank Brown, and I head up the Anti-Corruption and Governance practice at the Center for International Private Enterprise, or CIPE, as we call it. I'm based here in Washington, D.C., and I'm joined by a couple of guests, one who's joining us from elsewhere here in the United States, and then our second guest is joining us from Rome in Italy. And to give you a sense of the context of the podcast, this is part of our rapid response series of podcasts devoted to finding quick solutions to anti-corruption issues as well as opportunities. So this is part of a multi-part series. And as you'll hear, we're focusing here on specifically corporate responses to corruption challenges. This all comes in the context of a tremendous period of volatility and fragmentation in the space when we're talking about corporate anti-corruption compliance and governance and business integrity issues. Things are changing. And this podcast itself and my guests today are especially well positioned to talk about how the community is addressing those challenges. So without further ado, I'll let them introduce themselves, and then we'll get on with the podcast. First up, I'd like to introduce Nicola Aloco, who is the chairman of the Business at OECD, also known as BIAC, the Integrity and Anti-Corruption Committee. Nicola, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Frank. It's a pleasure to be here. I am an executive professor and entrepreneur working on governance, integrity, and AI. For more than 25 years, I have worked in the private sector on governance and business integrity in complex environments, sometimes facing cultural and even criminal barriers. As you said, today I chair the Integrity and Anti-Corruption Committee at the Business at OECD, and I was also co-chair of the B20 Integrity and Compliance Task Force in Brazil and South Africa. I teach responsible business conduct at the University of Rome Tor Vergata, and I also contribute to international master programs on anti-corruption, public procurement, risk management, and AI governance. A big part of my recent work focuses on helping organizations understand how artificial intelligence is changing performance, compliance, and decision-making. Finally, I'm very happy to join this conversation today.
Thank you, Nicola. And I think we're getting a clear sense that you bring both a global sensibility to this as well as an academic sense. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mohammed Ahmed, who's based here in the United States, is also a member of CIPE's board. Mohammed, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, Frank. Hello, Nicola. It's an honor to be here. I am the Global Anti-Corruption and Financial Crime Compliance Leader of Deloitte Global. I lead our in-house compliance in anti-corruption, anti-money laundering, sanctions, and export controls. I'm also currently a vice chair of the Integrity and Anti-Corruption Committee at Business at OECD. And as Frank mentioned, I'm on the board of CIPE. So this podcast is very exciting for me because it brings together two of my worlds. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Mohammed, it's great to have you here as well. And I should mention that the immediate sort of framing of this conversation coincides with the release of a new policy paper from the Business at OECD group. The policy paper is called Talk Integrity: How Corporate Communication Drives the Fight Against Corruption. And this has very much been an initiative of Nicola and the committee as a whole. It was released recently, and this podcast is a chance to discuss the policy paper and also talk about what next steps the committee may have and where this fits in generally into the committee's work. So with that, Nicola, I wanted to ask you, keeping in mind that there may be some listeners who are not familiar with Business at OECD and the Integrity and Anti-Corruption Committee, I wanted to ask you if you could briefly explain the role that those two entities play and why they are increasingly relevant in today's global environment.
Yes, the OECD is an international organization where governments work together to develop global standards, identify best practices, and find common solutions to global challenges. A major global challenge today is corruption. This is why the OECD has become a leading international institution in promoting integrity, transparency, and the fight against corruption. Frank, exactly 27 years ago, the OECD introduced the first effective multinational anti-corruption framework through the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention. Before the convention was signed in 1997, there was no effective multinational framework for the prevention and prosecution of bribery. Today, the convention legally binds 46 countries and remains one of the most important international instruments in the fight against corruption. And within this ecosystem, business at OECD represents the business voice at the OECD level, bringing together more than 10 million companies across more than 55 countries, representing around 60 million workers worldwide. Within the business at OECD, the Integrity and Anti-Corruption Committee brings together experts working on integrity, anti-corruption, responsible business conduct, and governance. And beyond contributing to the development of the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention and its recommendations, we are also trying to anticipate and focus on emerging trends shaping the future of integrity and compliance, such as AI, communication, education, and the concept of zero as a target. And I think that these topics are becoming increasingly important because today's companies are operating in a very volatile, complex, uncertain, and ambiguous environment. We are facing geopolitical instability, technological transformation, supply chain pressures, and growing challenges linked to trust and credibility. And in this kind of liquid world, shortcuts become very tempting. But shortcuts in governance always generate long-term costs in trust, resilience, and credibility. And this is why integrity today is no longer only a compliance topic. It is becoming a strategic business priority and a key element of resilient and forward-looking governance.
So, Nicola, that's you're hitting on some of our favorite themes here at CIPE, and that is first and foremost that the OECD can play a unique role in emerging markets where we work, in part because it's a multilateral voice, and its sensibility is dictated by member countries, but also all the different countries and jurisdictions that are in that sort of global trade orbit as well. And I noticed at in Paris when we were all there in March for the big anti-corruption conference that happens every year, there's never been such a private sector turnout. So I think the private sector is increasingly turning to bodies like your own for guidance as things change so quickly. With that, Mohammed, obviously you bring a especially interesting point of view to bear, and I wanted to talk a little bit ask you to talk a little bit about your role as vice chair of the committee, and also how you leverage your experience at Deloitte in the role that you're playing.
Yeah, so what Nicola laid out so beautifully is how anti-corruption has evolved into a business imperative over the years. In fact, within business at OECD, the Integrity and Anti-Corruption Committee falls under the responsible business umbrella. So one of the ways that I contribute to this committee is drawing upon my 28-year plus experience in Deloitte, both with establishing and navigating anti-corruption internally as a business imperative during my current in-house role, but also observing other organizations' journeys with anti-corruption during my previous external-facing role in providing services to numerous multinational clients. I also draw upon this experience and work closely with others on the committee in helping shape business at OECD's strategy and priorities based on the emerging trends that Nicola described so articulately. I've also provided input into the policy paper that we're talking about today. One of the areas that I've not had a chance to do yet, but I'm due to do in the future, is to leverage my experience as a thought leader and author of various OECD, UN, and Deloitte publications on integrity and anti-corruption, and contribute to the delivery of the various events that the committee organizes around the world.
So, Mohammed, thank you. And that's a very concise sort of capturing of what 28 years working with multiple organizations in your previous position and now having an internal vantage point, as well as the future with thought leadership. Like, that's a wonderful encapsulation of the role that you play, and that the kinds of roles I think that members of the committee more broadly that they play as well. All the different data points and all the different points of view that come together on that committee as it convenes and deliberates under your leadership, Nicola. So, Nicola, I wanted to turn to you and ask you a little bit more about the policy paper, Talk Integrity, How Corporate Communications Drives the Fight Against Corruption. As I understand it, it grew out of a new vision for the committee itself and your desire to find new ways to talk about corruption. Could you explain a little bit about why the policy paper is especially needed now and what you're hoping to accomplish with it?
Yes, dear Frank, I'll go straight to the point. This paper was needed because today many companies already have strong compliance systems, strong policies, and strong controls, but very often behavior does not change. And this is the real point. In this sense, the paper is built around 5 main ideas. The first is moving from rules to behavior. Policies usually speak to the brain, but if we really want to change behaviors, integrity communication must also reach the gut, and I would add the heart. The second is moving from fear to business integrity. In the past, communication on corruption was often defensive, negative, and fear-based. Today, we believe a more positive and proactive approach focused on business integrity is needed. This is also why we need to evolve. We evolved the name of our committee into Business Integrity and Anti-Corruption Committee, because people connect more easily with values than with fear. Third idea is practicality. We wanted to collect real examples showing how companies are trying to make integrity more visible and understandable in everyday organizational life. And I can anticipate that we have also a great example from Deloitte. The fourth idea is simplification. For example, through the Zero Corruption Manifesto, we translated more than 1,500 OECD recommendations and standards into 10 simple principles to make integrity easier to understand, communicate, and apply. But beyond simplification, the manifesto also has a broader ambition. It tries to break cultural barriers and promote the idea that zero corruption should be treated as an 18th SDG. And what is interesting that recently the manifesto has started gaining traction across countries, public institutions, companies, and business associations. And finally, the paper also carries a broader message. The real challenge today is not writing more policies. The real challenge is making integrity visible, understandable, and part of organizational culture.
And I can't agree more, because one of the biggest challenges we have at CIPE as we work in emerging markets, often with smaller businesses, is simplifying the message, to your point about the 10 easy principles, and also moving from an entirely reactive, defensive, fear-based response to one that's looking proactively and seeing how folks' best interests and the best interests of a company are served by adhering to these principles. So thank you. That's a very good fit. Mohammed, I wanted to turn to you to talk a little bit about one of the better case studies or practice approaches that's featured in the paper, and that's the dilemma training at Deloitte. Could you describe the evolution of this and how the different audiences at Deloitte were contemplated as you rolled it out as you developed the dilemma approach?
Yes, so for the benefit of those listeners who may not know about it, Dilemma is a professionally produced TV series style program that represents Deloitte's ethics and compliance training. It is delivered in short episodes. Each episode features ethics and compliance dilemmas in realistic settings that Deloitte professionals encounter in their day-to-day, covering a number of areas, including anti-corruption. Dilemma was born with a desire to reimage the traditional style e-learning that was in place at the time. The idea actually came in 2023 from a Microsoft training that was a TV-style drama featuring actors. At the time, they'd report that their employee engagement had increased dramatically with this approach, which is what we at Deloitte were trying to achieve in our reimaging. Deloitte has approximately 470,000 professionals from across all corners of the world, many whom are millennials and Gen Z. So keeping in mind this dynamic, Dilemma was designed based on a value that is understood in all cultures, which is integrity. And also using storytelling to create something that would appeal to an audience with shorter attention spans and a strong preference for visual, authentic content. The impact of Dilemma has been staggering. Engagement has skyrocketed. Internally, over 100,000 individuals have visited the dedicated site. Externally, people are posting its appreciation in forums, and we have won a number of awards for it.
That notion of storytelling, Mohammed, is just so important because we've done a fair amount of work looking at how you actually begin to achieve behavioral change through messaging around anti-corruption. And having a strong narrative is super important, both in terms of effectively communicating a company's policy, but also within the general public. And it sounds like you're getting pickup beyond Deloitte around Dilemma. But with the general public, making sure that the way you talk about corruption doesn't actually encourage more corrupt practices because it's viewed as a new norm. So that's quite useful because it underscores and sort of reinforces the approach at CIPE we're taking with our anti-corruption messaging programming. Nicola, so I'd like to drill down a little bit on if we look at the paper, what do you see as some of the important takeaways from it for those organizations that are trying to strengthen their integrity and compliance culture? And of course, folks can check out the paper online. We'll put a link to it in the podcast notes. But I'd love to get a sense here what you see as the takeaways.
One of the main takeaways from the paper is that integrity communication should no longer be treated only as a support activity. I think that the paper highlights 5 main ideas. The first is communication as a governance asset. Integrity communication directly influences culture, understanding, and behavior across organizations and value chains. The second is moving from awareness to operational behavior. Integrity communication cannot remain only a yearly campaign or a compliance presentation. It becomes effective when it is embedded into leadership behavior, onboarding, training, decision-making, and daily operations. The third is audience-centered communication. Different stakeholders, employees, managers, suppliers, or SMEs require different languages, tools, and approaches. This is why the paper includes practical examples using video, dilemma-based learning, like Mohammed has just explained, case studies, gamification, and targeted communication strategies. The fourth is scalability. Large corporations often already have mature compliance structures, while SMEs, small and medium enterprises, may have fewer resources and communication capabilities. So the paper also tries to provide practical and adaptable approaches that smaller organizations can realistically apply. And the 50 is probably the broader message behind the entire paper. Today, integrity is no longer only about preventing misconduct. It is more and more connected with trust, resilience, sustainability, governance, quality, innovations, and AI. Because in the end, integrity becomes truly effective when it stops being only a rule and starts becoming part of the everyday organizational culture.
So this is a welcome news to me, and sort of it's great to hear the scalability part. Especially, I'm heading out to Indonesia in about a month, and much of my work on the ground in Jakarta will have to do with Indonesia's journey to OECD accession and the convention that we talked about earlier, and how that applies to businesses in Indonesia. And that scalability piece is absolutely essential, because the constituencies there include SMEs, a huge state-owned enterprise sector of the economy, and then regional companies that are powers in Southeast Asia broadly. So this is very, very relevant. Thank you, Nicola, for laying that out. Mohammed, one of the insights that I took from the paper is that corruption doesn't exist in isolation. It's very much part of overall issues and challenges and opportunities at a company. So I wanted to ask you, if we don't look at anti-corruption efforts holistically in a bunch of different risk and compliance areas, what happens? Like what occurs when we don't do that? And I know I won't get into them because there's not time on the podcast, but there are a couple especially good examples in the policy paper from Novartis and Iberdrola that folks can read about. But I'm wondering, how do you see this play out worldwide?
This is a really good point, Frank. It is indeed important to have a holistic viewpoint towards integrity. The topic of this paper, communications and training, is one of several facets of an anti-corruption program. While focusing on building awareness is important, an organization's program may not be effective if it does not have the requisite focus on other elements, such as testing and monitoring, a robust third-party due diligence, amongst others. Even with all those elements in place, the program may not be effective without a strong ethical culture, one where integrity is front and foremost and part of the DNA of an entity. The challenge many organizations face, though, worldwide, is how to manage an infinite and complex universe of risks and compliance requirements with scarce resources. This is where having integrity as a core value, a North Star, is critical, and something that does not require investment in resources. It can be achieved with leadership and the right attitude. So with that as a North Star, a good risk management process is key, allowing an organization to determine which levers to pull, how best to allocate those scarce resources in managing the risks and compliance needs. A lean compliance and ethics program with integrity at its center can be far more effective than an elaborate one that is packed with bells and whistles, but superficial and without integrity as a North Star.
So that's an especially relevant point in the environment we're in right now, where because of economic pressures, because of mixed messaging around some anti-corruption enforcement regimes, what I'm hearing anecdotally from folks in the compliance world is there's more pressure than ever for them to deliver more with less. So your point to it's not all about the resources. It goes deeper to that's a point well taken. Nicole, I wanted to pivot to you to talk about one of the things that the paper covers, and that's that there's an evolution in the skills and capabilities required within compliance functions, because things are changing all the time, especially technologically. So I wanted to ask you, what new capabilities do you believe are becoming increasingly important, particularly with the growing role of artificial intelligence?
Yes, thank you, Frank, because capacity building is very critical. I think that the role of compliance is evolving very quickly. Traditionally, compliance functions were mainly focused on legal, regulatory, and control activities. These capabilities are still fundamental, of course, but today they are no longer enough on their own. In this sense, the paper highlights three major capability shifts for the future of compliance. The first is communication and engagement capabilities. Compliance professionals must be able to explain complex topics in a simple and practical way, connect with different stakeholders, and help translate policies into real behaviors and decisions. The second is system thinking. Today, integrity risks are interconnected with supply chains, sustainability, procurement, cybersecurity, AI, and corporate culture. This means compliance can no longer operate in silos and must become part of the chain of command, as we highlighted in our recent BIAC call to action, upholding integrity and compliance amidst global uncertainty. And the third AI capabilities is that we need to use AI responsibly, but we also need responsible AI. AI is changing both the risks companies face and the way compliance works. This means we need more AI literacy, more understanding on how algorithms influence decisions, and stronger governance capabilities around data accountability and human oversight. At the same time, as highlighted in our recent paper, Harnessing AI for Integrity, AI can also become a powerful enabler for compliance. It can help organizations improve training, personalize communication, identify anomalies, strengthen monitoring, and increase awareness across large and complex ecosystems. So I believe the future compliance professional will need to combine technical expertise with communication skills, critical thinking, governance capabilities, and a responsible understanding of AI.
Very well put. And I think you're zeroing in on something that we try to calibrate often in our work with partners in emerging markets, and that is that AI can be used to sort of, in a much more efficient way, identify red flags and issues of concern, but ultimately human beings needed to be deployed to actually uncover what's happening within a specific unit or understand dysfunctionalities that can lead to issues. So thank you for highlighting that, and I'm glad that's in the paper as well. Mohammed, I wanted to turn to you as a CIPE board member, where obviously CIPE is a democracy organization. And as I was reminded recently, as I did some work in Ukraine around the reconstruction that will come after the war in Ukraine ends, and I was working on a program where we're engaging with SMEs, which make up the vast majority of Ukrainian businesses, so they have better access to the procurement that will come with the end of the war in Ukraine. And without SME participation, Ukrainian democracy will suffer, right? If there's a perception that the oligarchic elites have captured the process. So that's a very long-winded way of asking you, as a CIPE board member, what are the special needs of SMEs and how can we focus on them, in keeping this paper in mind as we move forward? And what does the paper offer for practitioners at SMEs?
As a board member of CIPE, I can certainly appreciate the importance that compliance can have for SMEs. In the development of this paper, SMEs were front and center in terms of focus. While many of the case studies in the paper are from larger organizations, each of these case studies include a set of principles that I feel can be adapted successfully by SMEs. The paper can really help SMEs gain some practical insights. To illustrate, let me share some tactical components that I feel are important for SMEs to consider in developing or enhancing their approach to anti-corruption communication. First, what is the intended audience for a given communication? Is it the entire workforce, a select group or function, select levels within an organization, or even those in select locations? The answer to this could be based on operations and structure of the organization and can vary by communication. Second, who should the communication be sent from? Should it come from a compliance team or a senior leadership or frontline business leaders? Again, this can vary by communication and would be based on weighing the type of impact each option may have on the recipients. Third, how should the communication be delivered? Should the communication be done via email or a video or an internet article or be spoken in a live setting? Each can be effective depending on the objectives of the communication, the factors specific to the SME, such as demographics of the intended audience. Oftentimes, a mix of communication vehicles can be an effective strategy. Fourth, how often should the communications be made? How many should be done in a year? How often does a particular topic need to be reinforced? Should the anti-corruption messaging be combined with other communications, such as those related to ethics? There's always a possibility of communications fatigue at an SME. And so these are important questions to answer in determining what the most effective approach may be for each organization. The paper shares examples of how some organizations have thought through each of these considerations. SMEs can learn from these examples and tailor their compliance strategy accordingly to increase chances of maximum impact of their anti-corruption communication approach.
Perfect. That captures what. So one of the theory of change that we have is at CIPE is that one way to motivate change in behavior by SMEs on this corruption front is to underline the degree to which if they want to join global value chains, they need to adhere to the compliance standards of the global companies, the multinationals with which they want to do business. And in that moment, we often see these issues that you're describing. So the SME may get guidance from a multinational regarding compliance, but it is just too much, right? The SME can't even begin to think about having that sort of compliance operation given the size difference. And so the factors you're describing are quite relevant as we adapt to SME needs. And it's great to see in the policy paper as well that those needs are being addressed. I know we're coming to time. I think we have time for one more question. And Nicole, I'd like to hand that off to you. Given the leadership you've shown of the committee and of course with your vice chair, Mohammed, working in tandem with you, wanted to see if you could give us a sneak preview of what's coming up next for the committee and the sorts of emerging topics that you think will shape the future of integrity and compliance.
Yes, Frank. I think that the future challenge is not adding more rules. Today, organizations operate in a world characterized by fragmentation, overlapping requirements, too much bureaucracy, and growing compliance complexity. And in many cases, this creates confusion, slow innovation, reduces competitiveness, and sometimes even makes controls less effective. So the next challenge for the integrity and compliance community will be simplification. Pay attention, I do not mean deregulation. The objective is a smarter regulation and more effective governance. This is why compliance must move toward a more lean approach. The real value of compliance is eliminating unnecessary controls, reducing friction, speed up processes, and helping organizations work better. And this is exactly where AI can become a powerful enabler. Sorry if I come back to this topic, but technology now gives us the possibility to increase compliance capacity while also improving performance, speed, and decision making. And this also means changing one of the biggest biases in governance, the idea that there is no trade-off between business and values, performance and compliance, results and rules. Because if governance is designed properly, integrity can actually become a driver of competitiveness, trust, and long-term resilience. And this is exactly the direction we should move toward: simpler, smarter, and more human-centered governance systems. And maybe I leave you with a small spoiler. This is exactly where our next committee paper will start from.
So that's an entire inspiring vision of the future. I mean, that would be an extraordinary step forward and an extraordinarily sort of bright and optimistic reality if we're to achieve what you're describing. And I think it's really important to aspire to something and to set high goals for ourselves and to help folks imagine what could be. So with that, I'd like to urge listeners to check out in the show notes. You'll find a link to the policy paper. It's called Talk Integrity: How Corporate Communication Drives the Fight Against Corruption. And it's been released by Business at OECD, and more specifically, the Integrity and Anti-Corruption Committee. And we've had the pleasure of having the chair of that committee and vice chair, Nicola Loco and Mohammed Ahmed, with us today for the podcast. This has been part of our rapid response series of podcasts from the Anti-Corruption and Governance Practice at CIPE, the Center for International Private Enterprise. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks to our guests as well. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Democracy That Delivers is brought to you by the Center for International Private Enterprise.